coming your way over the next little bit. Conor Murray is in the spotlight over the last little while, obviously due to his injury and potential contract negotiations as well. Connacht against Leinster this weekend, the other provincial derby too, Munster and Ulster. Joe Marler is retired from club duty and the All Blacks bouncing back, so that's a bit of a flavour of what's going on. Quinny, good morning to you.
Morning, Adrian.
Keith there,
how are you?
Talking about the good old days, and eventually he managed to get his stuff together and obviously put together a fine career. Talking about going on the beer sort of immediately before games and stuff like that, I'd imagine that that was part, particularly in certainly in the amateur days, clearly, but even when you would have started to come into the game, it was probably still there, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think there was probably a lack of understanding about what you could and couldn't drink and how much and how bad it was for you, and fitness levels were different, with professionalism in 95, 96. I think in our earlier days, we probably thought a few pints was certainly on the weekends after matches, Saturdays, maybe a few on Sunday, and you kind of a day or two to recover and you start the week slowly. And I think we've heard from so many soccer players over the years, even Roy Keane when he went to England first, the Monday clubs, the Tuesday clubs, sometimes, after a midweek game, there was a culture of that. So it's nothing new, and I can understand what Keith is saying. Temptation, you have a few quid in your pocket, you go to England, everyone's heading out.
And is it written off as sort of team camaraderie? Is that how it's sort of
I think it was just a culture maybe, and that culture has changed dramatically in all sports and all societies, and in modern times that sport has just gone to a different level with nutrition, fitness, all that kind of stuff, and I enjoyed part of that amateur era. I was never a big drinker, but we all enjoyed a few drinks, and we, even with the old Munster teams we would have played with in the earlier days, it was an important part of bonding, getting to know each other, having the crack as well off the field. I think, and the professional teams in the provinces and with Ireland now, they have to pick and choose their moments of a night out, and but certainly it's not a case of get into the habit of heading for a few pints. That just doesn't happen anymore.
Almost,
yeah, and look, if you want to be an elite sports person, it just doesn't work. Even for amateur guys playing GA or whatever, you hear the way they prepare now. The GA players, like I speak to a lot of guys, and they, there's from January right through to the end of the championship, it's very, very minimal. Sometimes none at all. That's how serious they are. So if you want to be serious in sport, I think the kids coming through nowadays will. All that information is there from now about, not to drink and in moderation, all that stuff. None of that stuff. We grew up in a culture where it was normal to have a few pints the night before.
Everything in moderation.
I remember the great Moss Keane, if you go back to the amateur days and the great Moss Keane and players he played with, Donald Lenihan, all these guys, and it was the forwards used to head out on a Friday night for 3 or 4 or 5 pints just to have a little forwards meeting in the pub in Ballsbridge, and that was a common thing, just to have a chat,
take the edge off.
Take the edge off, and exactly. Donald Lennon always said that to me, just take the edge off, but don't go over the quota. That happens, but so it's all changed nowadays.
Yeah, very good. I know that we were going to talk about sort of Joe Marler a bit later on, and he's England front row, and he's retired from international duty, and he's sort of released a statement, a fairly short statement. There hasn't been a huge amount of more detail about sort of the specific rationale as to why he's retired, but it is obviously, it's a big, you can see some of the headlines about it over the net this week. It's the draw on the physical and mental capacity of players these days is full on. He's spoken about it himself before.
Yeah, it's. I'm not surprised that he's kind of stepping away. Well, obviously it's a shock, but he's been one player that's pretty vocal about the length of the season in England, the amount of games they have to play. And even recently I heard him say, look, I'd rather get less money and play less games and have a few more breaks. I think it goes back to the envy of where the players are managed here in Ireland. Not everyone agrees with it. We've the Interpros coming up this weekend. 95% of all our top players will play. The next round of Interpros, they probably won't be playing. They'll be mixed and matched a bit. But we have the luxury of doing that here in England and France. You're a bit more of a commodity. You play nearly every game if you're fit and available. There's no such thing as resting, and it happens in France a lot. So Joe Marler has spoken, about his young family now, and genuinely the commitments away with the national team are you play a couple of games, then you're gone for a block, and you're literally out of the home for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and it's a long time to be away. And he's obviously said, you know what, something has to give, either the club stuff or the international stuff, and he wants to try and be happy and content in himself and be closer to his family, and you respect his decision, even though, you know, it is relentless. I chatted to Peter O'Mahony recently, and you know, I'm just, it's non-stop for these guys, even though they get managed with their time, but they're away a lot, and that is challenging. It's the one part of it. You know, people think you go to Australia, you're away in camp for 6 weeks for Six Nations, November, all that kind of stuff, and they think, you know, it's great being away in hotels all the time, and
it gets old pretty quickly.
95% of the players, particularly nowadays, the older ones who have a family, it's hard being away from your wife or your partner and young kids, and you feel a responsibility, you're not helping out. So it's probably for that reason, and it's understandable.
It's quite telling that the club was given preference over the international career at this point. Do you see sort of rugby going down a path like soccer, where the international retirement naturally comes 5-6 years before your club retirement?
Yeah, I do, Owen, because it's just so much rugby. The season is so long, and you can imagine, look, we see it every year. Long season, the emotions of the ups and downs throughout the whole season, and then you head off for 3 or 4 weeks in June, and you're not back till the end of June, and it's a long time. You have a couple of weeks off, and it's hard to kind of get all that balance right, of spending time with a few mates, having a game of golf, and then you've kids and your wife and whatever, and getting away on holidays, and just seeing family and being normal for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of pressure, and I just think what rugby players get paid, and not compared to soccer players in the Premiership, they deserve every penny, because it's so physical. There's so many demands, sacrifices that have to be made, and they don't get all the luxuries and the bells and whistles that the soccer players get.
They feel it later down their life as well.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and physically it's very demanding. So I can understand it. And look, he can't pick international and say, I'm not going to play club, because you won't. You know, you've got to play club, that stepping stone up. But it is relentless, and it's there's a lot of pressure there and a lot of sacrifices to be made.
Give you the latest in the Ryder Cup before we get into the interprovincials this weekend. Justin Rose is a very long putt to half the hole in his match, in the top match, and it just slips by the hole, so that should be that one all level. That's Justin Rose and John Ram level now against Brooks Koepka and Tony Finau. It's level as well there through 6 now, I think. Through 5 level as well between Rory McIlroy and Thorbjorn Olesen, who are up against Dustin Johnson and Ricky Fowler. 1 up in the third match to the USA. That's Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth against Paul Casey and Terrell Hatton there through 4 holes, and then through 3 all square as well. In the bottom match between Francesco Molinari and Tommy Fleetwood up against Tiger Woods and Patrick Reed.
Patrick Reed, yeah.
Right, that's the way to stay to play. It's all very tight over the early holes of the Ryder Cup. We're going to keep that coming your way over the next little while too. And back to John Malloy in a bit. Quick look at the fixtures this weekend live on Air Sport as well. We have the match-up tomorrow, Connacht and Leinster, tomorrow evening from 5:15 on Air Sport 1, and also on the same channel a bit later in the evening is the other provincial derby between Munster and Ulster. Connacht, Quinny, is where I want to begin this, because they're a pretty interesting story. I know you've been looking at it a bit over the last few days. Andy Friend, I mean, it's all turning up rosy for them again. It's got shades of Pat Lam about it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has that kind of feel-good factor, and that's what the kind of soundbites you're hearing out of Connacht. It's amazing how, you know, one good performance against the Scarlets. It's not one good performance. I thought they played really well against Glasgow in the first game. Their skills were good. They played attacking rugby. They seemed to be enjoying themselves and really excited to play, and a little bit porous in defence, and they got caught by a good Glasgow side. They should have won that game. They were, I think, 10 or 12 points up with 15 minutes to go. They had opportunities in the end. They beat Zebra, lost away to a good Edinburgh side, which is a tricky place to go. So it's been positive. I think the story is Andy Friend, from where it was last year and what we were hearing about, you know, the mood in the camp under Kieran Keane, and he's obviously come in, Andy Friend, and assessed the whole situation and sat down with people and said, you know, what do I need to do here? I think first and foremost for any coach, you've got to get a good mood in the camp, and you've got to get them to trust you and like you. As the season goes on, some will dislike it because you're not picking them. You might be hard on other guys who are not pulling their weight. So it's the balance of getting all that right, and there's a fair bit of pressure manage a big group like that and trying to get the best out of them. But what we hear is, he's a positive guy. He's trying to give confidence to guys, make them believe in themselves a little bit again. And it's kind of harsh on Kieran Keane because, his reputation as a coach was very good before he came in. And it just seemed like, whether it was because he came late, just didn't seem to have his research done on the type of guys he'd have. Some obviously very good players, but maybe a few guys who needed a bit more developing, a bit more confidence. And that whole Pat Lam scenario of connecting with the community and getting the crowd behind you.
That too.
Yeah, and then look, it kind of started earlier last year with Kieran Keane when a few results went. He did an interview on Sky Sports, not just Sky Sports, but a few other media people, and it just seemed like he was tetchy, grumpy, and what the fans want to hear is, even if you lose a game, well, how are we going to fix it and where are we going to go? And they want to hear optimism and positivity, and he just didn't embrace that scenario. Which is unfortunate for him, and obviously when sacking the guy or terminating his contract is an admission from Connacht and the RFU that it didn't work out, they didn't get it right. So obviously in their due diligence and trying to find someone, you're trying to find someone who's going to be positive, who's going to be full of energy, who's going to try and change a situation that was really negative. So he went through a bit of player discontent in 2011 with the Brumbies. So I think maybe that would be to his advantage and the Connacht's advantage, because the Brumbies he was coaching the Brumbies and for a couple of seasons, and results were going bad, and this can happen if you lose in matches. You hear rumblings in any sport, and he got kind of pushed out and his contract was terminated in 2011. Went away to Japan coaching, went with the Australian 20s, the 7s, and kind of reinvented himself. So he seems to portray and kind of give a awful lot of positivity. Yeah. And I just thought the performance last week was worth saying, they look good. They look confident, they look happy.
When you talk about that sort of like instilling that positivity in the work that he's doing with the players, like Jack Carty is probably the best embodiment of that almost. He's a guy playing with confidence, and I think people were unsure about the consistent quality of this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've heard people say, look, he could push to get in the Irish mix, and I think he should, and I think it is down to confidence, and particularly playing in a pivotal role position like that. He is a really, really good player. Tom Farrell is another one in the centre I thought was outstanding last week. This kind of had to come the long way around. Guys who didn't get into the Leinster Academy. Gavin Thornby's another guy. I think he's out for the weekend.
Injured, yeah.
Cian Kelleher, there's a number of ex-Leinster Academy players there, and they've gone the kind of longer route to try and reinvent themselves and get back in. And you go back to Connacht when they won in 2015-16 season, they took everyone by storm. The positivity, the skill set, the way they played for each other, the unity of the team. And, they had a kind of a dip then, a bad dip. I think it'd be great for Irish rugby if they came back, because they were a great story that time. And I think they have a lot of good players. Paul Boyle has come in and, he's been outstanding. Copeland has gone there. Dave Heffron's a really good player at hooker. Ulton Delan is someone who wants to try and get back in the Irish setup. Had a fair bit of adversity in the last year. So they have a lot of good players when you start naming them. They lost their talisman, their leader, Muldoon, was there for so long. But I think it's a new era now under Andy Friend, and so far so good.
The thing is, though, last week Bundy Aki was back, and the difference was immediately noticeable. He is such a talismanic figure for them.
And he looked in some shape.
Yeah.
He looked to hit the ground running, which is, maybe the season before he was a bit slow off the ground, and you can see he's an international quality player, and he's probably preparing like that all the time now in the off season. He's conditioned, the shape of the body, all that kind of stuff, and he was brilliant. And you can see the enthusiasm of Farrell outside him, Carty inside him.
I was about to say, Farrell must love playing alongside
that. Yeah, well, anyone would. He's incredible. The offload for the try was just phenomenal. And look, I think you have to be careful that you don't get too carried away, because a week can be a long time. We're talking about optimism from Munster last week. They were terrible. So Connacht this week have got an angry Leinster side who are, the bar setters, really phenomenal. The standard they have and the start they've had this season has been top quality again. They were ruthless last week in disposing of Edinburgh in Dublin, and Cian Healy came out and said, look, it was disrespectful to kick that John Muldoon took last year.
Was that real? Was it?
But Owen's
a skeptic.
No, if I'm standing under the post, I'm thinking the same. But Probably the thing and the angriest part for them is they were beaten 47-10, and if you kind of, obviously they went on and won in Europe and won the Pro 14, but that would have really irritated Leo Cullen. And even though you could say the game was a bit insignificant, it was John Muldoon's send-off and Connacht were incredible. The question I asked at the time was, why didn't Connacht play like this all season at home? They were ferocious. Leinster maybe, understandably had their eyes and mind on other things. They were already qualified with a home semi-final. They were looking forward to a European final, a European semi-final as well, and then went on and won both. But it's been grating at them, and it kind of came out. Luke Fitzgerald has spoken about some other players. So I think we'll see where Connacht are tomorrow, and can they withstand that challenge? And it'll be another part of their growth. This is kind of a step that you're playing the best club side in Europe, coming to your patch. Can you back up a really good result last week with a top class performance again? And that's the challenge. But to be fair to Connacht, even in a very poor season last year in the league, the results in the Inter-Pros were very good.
It'll be fascinating to see what happens tomorrow. And for Connacht, for the rest of the season, we'll be keeping a very close eye on them. Munster, you were getting very carried away with them last week. When
you were trying to probe me to get carried away. I wasn't, because
Heineken Cup champions in waiting was what I was hearing.
That's what you said. Back me up on this one now.
A blip obviously last week. Just on a serious note, talk to us about, there's a run coming now, a very important run, and the importance of turning that around quickly. Yeah,
well look, first and foremost, they've got to find a performance tomorrow against Ulster, and a positive one. This isn't. I think there's actually more pressure on them now to get a really good performance tomorrow. There will be a reaction. I think they'll probably be disgusted themselves, coaches, players last week. It's probably the manner in the loss in Cardiff. I think everybody was excited about the team that was picked, and it was very close, if not the starting pack for Europe in a couple of weeks. Klein and Byrne in the second row, Mahoney, Stander, Clote, Tommy O'Donnell. There was a lot of quality there, good impact off the bench, you would think, and very surprisingly they were kind of physically out-muscled and beaten in the physical challenges, and very, very passive in defence. So there was a lot of incidents in the game where you're looking and you're thinking, Jesus, that's really bad, really bad, really bad. And I remember, probably, look, and I said they'd be very frustrated themselves, and I'm sure there would have been harsh words this week. The concern is they went to Glasgow. You give them a bit of pass on that one. It's the first away trip. Very strong side, but the worry is those two away games, they were physically out-muscled and just didn't turn up. In Glasgow, at least they came out in the second half and there was a massive reaction, and they played a lot better, and there was a lot of positives you can take away. Very few positives last week. So they play Ulster tomorrow evening at Thomond Park, and Ulster have 3 wins and a loss, and they'll fancy their chances going down to Thomond Park. And then obviously come to Dublin and play Leinster next week, and then away to Exeter. So it's for all the teams, Adrian, it's a massive couple of weeks. But I think for Munster in particular, they've got to really kind of bring a lot of energy and execution tomorrow night. But it can all change very quickly. Good result this week, and they'll be in good spirits coming to Dublin next week. But they really can't afford a bad performance tomorrow night, or it's going to be a really challenging couple of weeks to switch it around for the bigger games. Before
we let you away, we do want to get a word on Conor Murray. A lot of conversation reporting during the week that the RFU are going to make him the best paid Irish player in an effort to try and sort of keep a lot of the vultures at bay, I suppose, as we've seen over the last few years. I mean, this guy's highly regarded, potentially the best in his position on the planet.
Yeah, I think, and look, there's no doubt when player that quality, he's contracted up, there's going to be speculation, he's going to be linked to other clubs, and he's going to think about it. It's not going to be a case of, I'm just going to sign a contract, I want to stay. Ultimately, they're professionals, Adrian, and they want to try and get the best deal for themselves. And I think, look, I can understand the other side of it as well. You can't hold, and the RFU have shown before that you can't hold them to ransom and look for astronomical, out of this world money. But I think he deserves it. He's been consistently right at the very top of his game for a number of years, and so integral and important to Munster and Ireland. And so I don't envisage many complications unless he wants to go himself. And I'm not sure if he does or doesn't, but I think he probably, if he gets a really good offer. The question is, at this stage, does he want to travel and experience something different, or stay and continue playing? I would imagine the position he's in is probably different for Simon Zeba at the time, where, was he guaranteed to be on the team every week? And it's maybe a little bit different, and he probably feels he can come back. I think if Conor Murray left now, can he come back? He's 29. He will be 29 when the contract's up. So you think his next contract will be his best one, and deservedly so. Well, I don't know if it'll go to that, but I think he probably has some endorsements as well that will add to it. But look, he's the best scrum half in the world, in my opinion. So he'll probably be, if he signs a contract with the RFU, he'll be probably the best paid player, and you have to think that's fair enough, because he's so consistent and so good.
Presumably he's looking at what's going on around him as well, like in terms of Carberry coming in particularly, and thinking, finally I've got somebody here. And it'll be interesting to see when Murray is fit again and he's back in the pitch, like even how that dynamic works, for example. Who knows it?
Yeah, for sure, I think, and it was one of the reasons why Joey Carberry went there, to play with someone like Conor Murray. He's been phenomenal, and look, he's a very balanced, sensible guy who doesn't get carried away, and he's not going to sign a contract if he doesn't feel, and whoever represents him feel it's right for them. The kind of welfare scenario of playing here is one of the big things, but he wants to win things as well, so he'll want to try and see Munster improve this year, and obviously go to a World Cup and continue and move forward. He just wants to win things and stay at that consistent level.
Isabel Cody has been in touch with us. How can Munster shore up the defence, she asks, and how can they defend so badly outside Thomond but play marginally better there? It can't just be the ground.
No, I think it's probably an attitude thing, and look, people are intrigued by why would someone's attitude be bad. It's not that we heard Ferguson talking about United's performance last week against Wolves. Why would their attitude be not good enough at that level? But it's maybe a % or two off, and maybe the opposition being ferocious in their approach. Cardiff were under massive pressure last week, and it just takes one or two little mistakes, somebody to be a bit blasé and look to the guy inside or outside to make that big hit, and it just seemed to kind of filter through the group last week. So for JP Ferreira, I think his work this week in defence, I think he would have put him under a lot of pressure. A little bit of communication, a little bit of confidence, because if you look at one of the breaks by Ray Lilo, it was between Clothier and Carberry, and they both kind of looked at each other and said, was he your man or my man? And that stuff cannot happen at that level. Somebody's got to take ownership, and it has to be player driven as well. You're talking about the defence coach, so they've got to really, really make sure that they're, and it has to come from the coaches as well, that if guys are falling off tackles, that those mistakes happened last week, and there's zero tolerance on that now going forward, because you miss one tackle in the next couple of weeks and then it'll cost you and put you on the back foot in Europe.
There's one other thing I wanted to ask you, because we haven't had you in this week, but Jerry Flannery and his quotes in the newspapers last weekend was talking about the legacy of Rassie Erasmus on Munster. But the one comment that stuck out to me, because I know you mentioned him before, is that he felt Nienbar was the best coach he's ever worked with. He was like a sponge working with him, which I've never heard anybody say before. He was obviously highly regarded. As I said, you mentioned him before as an important part of that Erasmus backroom team, but I haven't heard anybody said he's possibly one of the best coaches around. Like, how big a factor could that be, and how big a factor is it going to be in future when we see the kind of legacy of him wear off a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's I've heard many players say that Nienbar was phenomenal to work with, and I think the role of the defensive coach is not to give him a system, not just to give them a system, but it's to inspire him, to want to impress him and kind of take away pride from making a tackle, getting back up, making another one. When they watch the videos, that he says, look what this guy did, he got back in the line, his work rate here was phenomenal, he assist tackled here. So it's not just making a one-on-one tackle, it's all the work rate and the pressure you put at the breakdown. And he was phenomenal at that, giving them that detail. But also, defence about inspiring, making fellas believe, because not everybody has the perfect tackle technique. Some guys are naturally better defenders than others, so it's about getting the balance and getting guys to believe in themselves, and he was phenomenal. So I think that's been an issue, and it's probably been hard on JP Ferreira to come in if this guy is up here at this level. And the run they went under him with their defence was phenomenal that whole season. So they've got to find a way to say, look, this is how we defended before, and put the pressure and translate that, and maybe help Ferreira himself, Jerry Flannery, Felix Jones, and translate that, and then get the players to drive it. But ultimately, if you're missing kind of one-on-one tackles, it's not good enough at that level, and they need to find a way to fix that really quickly.
Outside of watching the games on Air Sport 1 over the weekend, Quinny, you're going to be watching the Ryder Cup, I'm sure?
Yeah, I'll be glued to it as much as I can. It's phenomenal, and it's a great sporting occasion. I was saying on breakfast this morning that maybe I'm wrong, but I think people who just have an interest in sport, they might not sit down and watch golf on weekends, but this is different because you're seeing emotion, you're seeing passion, and you know, I just love to see guys expressing themselves, and we don't often see it in golf because, you know, they have the poker face, they move on to the next hole. See this, it's unique that there's multi-millionaires here, have the shackles off as such. It's not about money, it's about coming together as a group, so it's phenomenal.
Would you wear a Munster jersey or a Tip jersey going to watch a golf tournament?
I'd wear a Tipperary one, Owen.
Yes, thank you very
because
much.
The Kerry one is everywhere, and all over there again, you see the Kerry ones this morning.